familiar passage, and the disciples missed out on the first sentence of Jesus, which would have given them some reassurance. Can you remember what it is? Never mind. It's about, let's go to the other side. So in effect, Jesus was saying, look, we're going to go to the other side. So even if a storm did crop up, they could have simply just trusted Jesus and let him carry on with his kipping, really. But anyway, they didn't. But there's a message for us in that particular passage. And it's a familiar message. And it's a message that many people will be sharing who are following the lectionary this morning. It will go something like this. When we consider the personal tragedies that people face every day and the global crises that plague our world, I mean, the coronavirus has been in our faces for the past 18 months or so. Here in the UK, we're shortly to pass the grim milestone of 128,000 deaths. Brazil, I believe, has just passed 500,000 deaths. In the world at large, I think it's about 3.6 million people have died through coronavirus. People may well think, when faced with all this, and with limitations in the early days certainly placed on who can come to a funeral, who can't come to a funeral, numbers in church, funerals not in church, by the graveside, etc., etc., etc. Families being deeply, deeply, deeply distressed about not having a proper send-off for their loved one, whether it's coronavirus or something else. People may wonder whether Jesus or God is indeed God and Jesus is alive, that Jesus is asleep on the job. Further, we're reminded, or we see in the paper, or maybe it's our own personal experience, or a friend that a young father becomes paralysed through a stroke. A child suffers a malignant brain tumour, and a woman, after one too many beatings, leaves and abuses her husband. Where is God in all this? These are the kinds of things and more that beat against our hopes and dreams and swamp our lives. Teacher, do you not care that we too are perishing? So in the face of all these things, the Christian faith declares that God does care for each one of us. A difficult thing to accept when you're going through the mill. The Creator of the heavens and earth knows us by name and loves us. And even though we accept that, it's very difficult to follow that when you see your loved one suffering and dying. But we are part, nevertheless, of God's created world. We are created in God's image. And what's more, we have a suffering God. A God who is with us, in us, around us, in our suffering. If we believe that Jesus died on the cross, then I think we have to accept that God suffered. This is the struggle that the disciples faced in the boat. A feeling that many of us feel when we're faced with tragedy, a sense of no hope. They feel alone, abandoned by the one in whom they have put their trust. In part, we learn sometimes we learn the hard way. Is there any other, I might add, that God has come, is with us, will come to us in our suffering and pain, in our struggle to be human, in our fear, in our anxiety, in our doubt and uncertainty. That marvellous passage in Philippians talks about Jesus putting off the trappings of being God and instead puts on the mantle of humanity, became one of us. He became one with us, one for us. In that, he knows what human life is all about. He was shouted at. He was given bad news. He was betrayed. He was beaten up. He was arrested on bogus charges. He was tortured. And finally, he was unjustly executed. As the psalmist reminds us, O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You search out my path and my lying down. You are acquainted with all my ways. Where can I go from your presence? Where can I go from your spirit? If I ascend to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me fast. So when it seems like the light at the end of the tunnel is an oncoming train, when every silver lining has a dark cloud attached to it, when it appears that it's not as bad as it seems, but in fact it's much, much worse, then, even then, God is with us. So when the terrified disciples called out to Jesus, he answered them by calming the wind and stilling the sea. Jesus cares. But what it doesn't mean is that we won't go through times of pain, danger, suffering, or even death. Through the storm, we are held by the love of the one whom even the wind and the waves obey. After Jesus calms the storm, the gobsmacked disciples ask the most important question of all. Just who is this man? Indeed, who is this man, this Christ, this God, who sleeps through storms, accepts our accusations, and offers us his quiet, mysterious presence in wild and windswept places? Who is this God who loves us in the chaos of life? I believe that the presence of suffering and evil doesn't always lead to a loss of faith. Sometimes it does. My middle brother, Tony, lost his daughter, his youngest daughter, to leukemia when she was 19. And to this very day, he is very, 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 very bitter about God. He won't even let me talk about God at all because of his loss. But suffering and evil, the presence of, doesn't always lead to a loss of faith. You might question it, and that's healthy. But often the harsh realities of this broken, disordered world are what draws people to faith. Sometimes we seek the good because we experience the bad. There has to be a better place, a better way than what we experience. And we yearn for justice because injustice surrounds us everywhere. And we pray for calm because chaos brings us to our knees. It's after that vicious storm that the disciples recognise the holy in their midst. It's after the boat fills with water that they are filled with great awe. It's after Jesus accompanies them in the chaos that they realise who he is. And that may be the same for each one of us as we face our own personal tragedies. We may well have experienced our own personal tragedies, or we may come to those personal tragedies. So when you walk through a storm, the song goes, hold your head up high. Don't be afraid of the dark. At the end of a storm, there's a golden sky and the sweet silver song of a lark. And the challenge is always to walk on through the wind, to walk on through the rain, Though your dreams be tossed and blown, walk on with hope in your heart. And the promise is that you'll never ever walk alone. So even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for I know that you are with me. Let me pray. Holy Jesus, sometimes it seems that you are so far from us when we are hurting, troubled, or in pain. In those moments, we ask you to still the rough and restless seas of our hearts, so that we may see and hear you, the Holy One, who is with us, leading us safely through all the storms of life. Amen.
Amen.